How do you think when you think about God? Is He good? Because if He's good, then He will do these things. When you cry out to Him, begin to give thanks to Him, you will receive what you have asked for. You will receive what He has for you because He is good and He will give it to you. But listen, sometimes we have to go through what we go through because until we go through it, we won't cry out to Him. All right, we're going to finish up a series this morning called Grateful, and this whole month of November we've been basically looking at this idea of gratitude, of being grateful, and how it changes the way that we see things and how it changes the way we see the world. And we're gonna use a psalm again today. We've used psalms throughout this series to talk about this idea. And today we're going to be in Psalm 107. If you want to look that up, it's a great psalm that captures, I think, something that we all go through from time to time throughout our lives, and it represents parts or phases or seasons of our lives that I think are important. If we are aware of them, then we recognize them when we come, and we are prepared to act on them, and it changes the way that we do things. So I want to talk to you about this idea: cry out and give thanks. Cry out, give thanks. This is a pattern that I think we as human beings live in, whether we recognize it or not, whether we are aware of it or not, might be a different story. But I think after today, you might start to see some area in your life where this happens to you. The point that I want to get to today is this: when we take time to reflect and remember what God has done, we will be more intentional about giving Him thanks and living a grateful life. I just wanted to finish up this series with this idea that we want to live intentional, grateful lives, right? Not accidental, not oh, by the way, not on the side, but intentional, grateful lives. And when you live intentionally grateful, you are not being intentionally grumpy, right? Or intentionally difficult to get along with, or intentionally all the other things you could be when you're not being grateful. Amen? Anybody with me? Because if you're not being intentionally grateful, then what are you accidentally being? Right? Something else. So let's put it that way, and it's probably not good, right? But when we are intentionally grateful, when we live in intentional gratitude, looking for intentional ways to give God glory for what He has done, to thank Him for what He has done, then we get to experience the feeling of that, the emotion of that. God gave us emotions. Listen, a lot of Christians are in this weird, wacko kind of feeling or thought process that in church we're not supposed to feel any emotions, or we're not, in life in Christ, we're not supposed to feel any emotions. Though we will go spend, days and hundreds of dollars to go to a sporting event, a football game or something, just so we can get a little adrenaline pumping, or we'll go watch a movie, or we'll go do something else to get a little emotion riled up in us, because that's why we do it. But we come to church and think, oh no, I'm not controlled by my emotions. Well, listen, don't be controlled by your emotions. Control your emotions, but experience the ones you want, not the ones that just come naturally. We live supernatural lives, therefore we operate in supernatural emotions. Our emotions are controlled from the inside out, from the Spirit out, not from the world and circumstances in, right? So we choose our emotions based on how we decide how we're going to think, how we're going to process, how we're going to stay connected with God and let His emotions come to us and through us from the inside out, rather than our circumstances that are constantly trying to come from the outside in. And it's in that way that we choose gratitude, that we intentionally live a grateful life. Because if you're the kind of person, listen, I'm just going to start railing a little bit here. Just let me get it out of my system and then we'll be good, okay? If you're the kind of person that's constantly looking for what's wrong, you will find it every single time. 100% of the time, you will find what is wrong. If you can't find what's wrong, you will make something wrong so you find what you're looking for, because you will find what you're looking for. Choose what you're looking for and you'll find what you want. Come on. Are you with me? You have all of this power given to you by God. It's not some new age guru-ish kind of stuff. This is, the Bible says you choose how you're going to feel about what happens to you based on whether you are grateful or not, whether you look for the good and not the bad, whether you look for what is right and not what is wrong. You will always find what you look for. And if you're intentional about looking for something to be grateful for, you will get ungrumpy. Come on? That's a Hebrew word. It's in the Old Testament. When we are willing to do the hard work of looking for what is right rather than what is wrong, we can live in gratitude. We can live grateful. We can live with the elation of just being rejoiceful in everything, in all things rejoice. And again I say rejoice. The Apostle Paul says in Philippians. He was chained up in a prison. And he's telling everybody else, rejoice! And again I say rejoice. Like, how annoying must that have been to that soldier trying to guard him? And it's like, dude, just calm down. So we want to be grateful. In Psalm 107, it starts out this way. It says, give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. His love endures forever. It might remind you of an old song, right? I could play it on a guitar, but I won't do that today. But listen, we did it about 1,000,000 times back in the day. I think it was a Michael W. Smith song or something. Give thanks to the Lord, for, that one. Anyway, give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. For He is good. How do you think about God when you think about God? Is He good? Or is He out to get you? Is He out to smite you? Right? It's a funny word anyway. Okay. Unless you're being smited, then it's not funny. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. Now, this is an important thing right here to think about, because David is writing this in the Old Testament, under the Old Covenant, where redemption wasn't really available, right? It was available temporarily through the law and through the sacrifices, through the rituals, through all of those things, but it was always temporary and it was always short-lived. But David said, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Now listen, on this side of the cross, on this side of the covenants, we get to live in the redeemed state all the time, because Christ's sacrifice was permanent and once and for all. And so we are the redeemed of the Lord that doesn't have to continuously go back and do what they had to do to try and appease the situation. Sometimes I wonder if we take that for granted. Sometimes I wonder if we shouldn't have those reminders of what it cost, what it really took. What did it really take to go out into your herd of cattle or your sheep, or catch doves or something and bring them into the temple and slaughter them, and then have to deal with all of that mess, all of that gore that was there. It was a horrendous looking process. But it reminds us of what it really cost for us to be the redeemed of the Lord. It reminds us of what it really took for us to have our sins washed away and forgiven, released. And it's in that reminder, it's in when we get out of that mindset, that eye-rolling mindset. Oh, here he goes, talking about the sacrifice again. Yeah. Well, listen, if we don't ever talk about anything else but the sacrifice of Christ, we have talked about enough, because that's all there is. Because outside of the cross, outside of the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, we're all done for. We're all without hope. And we have no recourse whatsoever. And you might get attached to this 70, 80, 90 years that you have on this planet. But can I just tell you, that's a blip on the screen. That is a vapor that is slipping by. And when you start thinking spiritually and understand that you are an eternal being, never to die again, then it changes the way that you look at how much it means for Christ to save you, for Him to do what it took, so that you, by faith, through His grace, am able to step into a life of hope. And it's very easy for us to get distracted by this little world here and forget the magnitude of His grace and the magnitude of His sacrifice. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. Those He redeemed from the hand of the foe. Those He gathered from the lands from east and west, from north and south. Let them tell their story. Let them tell their story. When was the last time you told your story about where you were and where God has brought you? When's the last time you just sat down and thought about your story? Where you were, what you were stuck in, where you were hung up, where you were beat down, and God pulled you out of that. Well, that's what this psalm is about. That's what the rest of this psalm is about, is about that thing. So what is your story? Number one is, were you a hungry and thirsty wanderer? The psalm says it this way in verse 4. As he describes those who came from the east and the west, the north and the south. He says, some wandered in desert wastelands, finding no way to a city where they could settle. They were hungry and thirsty, and their lives ebbed and flowed. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever been there? Where your life is just ebbing and flowing. It's like you're being blown and tossed by everything that comes through. You're just all over the place. You're in the middle of the ocean in a tiny little boat, and you're just getting tossed back and forth. And you're hungry, and you're thirsty, and you're knowing there's something better. There's something else that I should have here. There's something more that I want. Sometimes we don't even know what we want. We don't even know what it is, but we feel the lack of it. We feel the hole that is there that needs to be filled. Verse 6 says, then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way to a city where they could settle. They cried out to the Lord. Cry out, give thanks. Cry out and give thanks. They cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He delivered them from their distress. Has God ever delivered you from your distress? Have you ever been stuck somewhere? Have you ever been hungry and thirsty and blown and tossed, and it's like life is just out of control, and you finally drop to your knees and cry out to the Lord, say, Lord, help me. I don't know what to do. And the next day the sun comes up and grace abounds, and things begin to settle, and things begin to come together, and all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, you realize, my trouble isn't quite as bad. I hope we can be aware enough that it doesn't require 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years for us to look back and say, what? God did answer that prayer. Like, let's be intentional about being grateful to Him. Let's go ahead and start giving Him thanks before it even happens. That's the key to everything, I think. It's just go ahead and start giving thanks even before it starts happening, even before it happens, because then you begin to live in an expectation. In your gratitude, you begin to cast out intentions that will come to pass, because what you cast out is what you begin to look for, and what you look for is what you will find. If you look for trouble, you'll find it around every corner. But if you begin to cast out thankful, grateful intentions of what God is doing, what God is already doing, just begin to thank Him for what you don't have, because whenever you begin to thank Him for what you don't have, you will begin to look for what you don't have, and you will have it. I'm just giving you this is good advice. Because when we begin to live grateful, He will deliver us from our distress. He led them by a straight way to a city where they could settle. Where we didn't have to be wanderers, Bedouins wandering around in a dry wasteland. But we could settle, we could get established, we could begin to bless and be blessed because we were able to get some roots, to get a place. So let them, he says in verse 8, let them give thanks to the Lord for His unfailing love and His wonderful deeds for mankind, for He satisfies the thirsty and fills the hungry with good things. Here's the question, do you believe that? How do you think when you think about God? Is He good? Because if He's good, then He will do these things. When you cry out to Him, begin to give thanks to Him, you will receive what you have asked for. You will receive what He has for you because He is good and He will give it to you. But listen, sometimes we have to go through what we go through, because until we go through it, we won't cry out to Him. And if we don't cry out to Him, then we'll never give thanks to Him, because we will think that somehow everything good that we've gotten, we got on our own, or we got by accident, or we got by some Big Bang Theory or some foolishness like that. But when we are willing to acknowledge our God, to acknowledge His hand in our lives, every moment of our lives, it will change the way that we look at things, and we will cry out. If you find yourself wandering and ebbing and flowing and hungry and thirsty today, we have an answer for you. Cry out and give thanks. Cry out to God for your help and give thanks for what He has done. Number 2, were you a prisoner in darkness? He says in verse 10, some sat in darkness, in utter darkness, prisoners suffering in iron chains. I want to ask you, have you ever felt the iron chains? Have you ever felt the iron chains of depression, of addiction, of a habit, of some kind of stuckness that you were in, and it felt like you were chained up to something, and you just couldn't break free, couldn't get away from it. Verse 11, because they rebelled against God's commands and despised the plans of the Most High. You see, sometimes when we rebel against God, the only way He can save us is to chain us up. The only way that He can really save us, I grew up on a farm down south, and sometimes you had to bridle a horse. You had to put a cow in a pen somewhere so that it wouldn't hurt itself, because it was out of control and it was going to kill itself if it didn't. So you had to tie it up. You had to tie it down. You had to stop it from acting that way so that it could get back to where it needed to be. And sometimes God has to squeeze us into tight little places where we just can't move anymore. And that is an act of His grace. In all things, give thanks. Even in those tight little places where you feel like you're being put in chains. Listen, those chains are put on us so that He can break them off. So He subjected them to bitter labor, and they stumbled, and there was no one to help. How many of you, listen, that is a blessed place to be. I know it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound, it sounds counterintuitive, but listen, when you are pushed to the rope, the greatest thing, the greatest blessing that God ever gave me, the greatest grace that God ever poured out in my life was when He pushed me to the absolute end of my rope where I had nothing else to hold on to. I had nothing else to grab. I had nothing else to depend on. And finally, at that place, in that place, I cried out to God and He saved me. And that started a journey in my life that changed me from a road to self-destruction to a road of serving my King. And it changed everything. I could take you where it is. I could tell you stories all day long about how this happened. I could take you to a road down in Helm where I was driving along. I was still in the army. I was driving along in a car, crying out to God, because I was so lost, so broken, so distant. And He pushed me right down to the end of that rope. And I was barely hanging on. And it was either let go or cry out. And by His grace, I cried out, and it changed everything. Verse 13, then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He saved them from their distress. He brought them out of darkness and the utter darkness and broke away their chains. Come on, listen, if you've ever had a chain broken off of you, if you've ever been stuck in your anger and bitterness, God broke a chain off of you and released you from that. If you've ever been stuck in unforgiveness and resentment against somebody and God broke that chain off of you and He released that. If you've ever been stuck in depression and despair and somehow the next morning the sun came up and you saw the dawn and you were able to breathe again and God broke that chain off of you. If you were ever addicted to a substance or to something, to a relationship, to a way of life, and somehow God came in by His grace and He released you from that so that you could live again, then you have been set free and you need to give thanks. You need to be grateful. You need to release the gratitude to the King. Come on. Because that is where it comes from. Let them give thanks to the Lord for His unfailing love and His wonderful deeds for mankind, for He breaks down gates of bronze and cuts through bars of iron. Come on, there's things that are in our lives that we're like, no, this is too big, this is too strong, this is too heavy. Listen, in their language, gates of iron, bars of iron and gates of bronze were as strong as you could get. And He cut right through them like nothing, like butter. Number 3, were you a rebellious fool? Come on. All the rebellious ones say, hey. Yeah. 17 says, some became fools through their own rebellious ways and suffered affliction because of their iniquities. I was so rebellious as a teenager, because life just didn't work out the way I thought it should have. And me being God, I should have had my way, and I didn't, and I was kicking and screaming every step of the way. And it just didn't work out the way I thought, and I had all sorts of good reasons to be mad about it. My real dad died when I was 1 year old. He died the day after my first birthday. I never knew him. My grandfather was very much a father figure to me. When I was 15 years old, he died. When I was 16 years old, my stepdad and mom divorced and split, and I refused to go with my mom to another town, so I stayed in that town with my stepdad. I came home from school one day, walked in the house, and everything in the house was gone. Refrigerator, stove, everything, it was gone except for my clothes were stacked in the living room. And I put those clothes in my car, an old 73 four-door Chevelle. Looked like a submarine. Big brown submarine. Ugliest car in the world. I loved it. I'd give you anything for it back. I paid $750 for it. I lived in that car for a year during my sophomore year of high school. I was 16 years old. And I bounced from house to house. I bounced from friend to friend or relative to relative, refusing to stay anywhere more than 3 days at a row because no one was going to leave me again. And I had this issue with God too. Because as far as I was concerned, he had left me as well. And I became very rebellious. And I rebelled against everything I could think of. Somehow, by God's grace, I stayed in school. I got through what I needed to get through. And that was about it. I kept myself busy and occupied so I wouldn't have to think about anything. I got in the army, continued to rebel against God. And God sent me to Iraq to get my attention. Not with the war. I was good with that. Like the shooting, the fighting, the blowing up, that's what I lived for. I was all about it. What I wasn't all about was sitting in the desert in the middle of Iraq with no noise, with nothing but the occasional tumbleweed going by. For almost 3 months, we sat there and waited for somebody to come and do something. And during that time, all of that noise, all that rebellion, all of that anger and bitterness that was built up in me that I didn't even recognize just began to unravel a little at a time and began to go down. And as it went down, I began to hear an old familiar voice. God saying, I'm still here. You rebelled against me, but I didn't rebel against you. I'm still here. And that started about another 5-year journey of me fighting and kicking and screaming every step of the way until finally I came to the end of my rope. By the time we got here to York, I was a recruiter here in York. Driving around at the end of my rope thinking everything is lost. And I pulled into the parking lot of the old building over across the way there. And I heard God's voice again say, you're home. You're home now. 1996, I walked into that building as a visitor. 1999, I got out of the Army and went on staff as the youth pastor. In 2000, I became the senior pastor, and I've been here ever since because this is where God saved me. This is where God brought me to be what that rebellious, dumb hillbilly couldn't figure out on his own. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. He sent them out. He sent them out his word and healed them. He rescued them from the grave. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love, his wonderful deeds for mankind. Who's that mankind? That's me. That's you. That's who he did this for. Let them sacrifice thank offerings and tell of his works with songs of joy. Let them sacrifice thank offerings and joy. Think about that. The sacrifice that we give to God is gratitude, thankfulness, and joy. Well, who doesn't like to feel gratitude, thankfulness, and joy in their own lives, in their own hearts? So our sacrifice to God is actually a blessing to us, right? You can't sacrifice what's already been sacrificed. That's the pain. That's the struggle. That's the hardship. That's the death. Jesus did that on the cross. What we get to sacrifice now is gratitude and joy and thankfulness. That's what we get to give up to God. Oh, poor us, wah, right? Come on, I'm just being joyful in the Lord. Poor little me. sacrificing joy. Really? Come on. We have to think correctly about this stuff, because if we don't think correctly about it, the devil will get in and he will warp our minds. The last one, we were self-reliant but stuck in the storm. Some went out on the seas and ships. They were merchants on the mighty waters. They saw the works of the Lord, his wonderful deeds in the deep, for he spoke and stirred up a tempest, a storm that lifted high the waves. They mounted up to the heavens and went down to the depths in their peril. Their courage melted away, and they reeled and staggered like drunkards. They were at their wits' end. How many of us have been way up here and life began to happen? And all of a sudden, things began to drop out the bottom. We thought we had it going on, man. We had it figured out. We had everything that we wanted, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, life began to happen, and comes crashing down around us because we become self-reliant, because we start thinking that we did that it's all about us, and we forget our God, and we forget the one who has paid the price and made it all possible for us. Listen, then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. How many of you know, then they cried out to the Lord and he brought them out of their distress is a statement of grace? Who deserved to be able to cry out to the Lord so that he could save you? None of us. It is grace alive. It is grace in action. That's the grace of God that he pours out for us. He stilled the storm to a whisper, the waves of the sea he hushed. I remember what that felt like in my own mind. I remember when the inside of my head felt like a hurricane in the Atlantic Ocean. I got used to it. I got used to the chaos. I got used to the noise. I got used to just the rage of it all. And then one day I cried out to the Lord. And he brought that storm down, and I had forgotten what peace felt like. Have you ever forgotten what peace feels like? You've lived in the turmoil and the stress of it all so long that you've just forgotten what peace feels like. Well, cry out to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. Let us give thanks. Let us give thanks for the Lord, to the Lord, for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. Let them exalt him in the assembly of the people and praise him in the council of elders. Listen, our praise needs to look like something. It needs to feel like something. It needs to be something. When we take time to reflect and remember what God has done, we will be more intentional about giving him thanks and living a grateful life. Are you intentional about your gratitude? Where were you when you cried out? How did he thank you? How did he rescue you, and have you given him thanks for that? Listen, one of the greatest ways we can give thanks and gratitude back to God is to tell our stories. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. If he's done something in you, then go tell somebody. Go share it with somebody. I've spent the last 20 years telling my story, just sharing it with whoever would come and whoever would listen, because he is the one that has done all good things in me. Because when I was on my own, by myself, I had nothing but self-destruction. And when he showed up, when he finally let the grace wash away the noise and the turmoil and the chaos, his love abounds forever. His joy, his grace comes, and it releases us to live the life we were meant to live, a life of purpose, a life that matters, a life that changes other lives. Your story, listen, redeemed one, your story Your story will save someone else's story.